19-year-old Rita Irene Ellis lived with her parents and three younger siblings in the town of Stevenage, Hertfordshire, in the south of England. Rita is described by family as a kind, caring and gentle person, though painfully shy and timid. Rita loved pop music and was a member of an official Gene Pitney fan club. The bedroom she shared with her youngest sibling, 10-year-old sister Tina, was covered in posters of her favourite pop stars. Rita was particularly close with her mother, and Tina would describe the two years later as being, quote, like sisters. After finishing school, Rita took a job at a local toy shop in Stevenage. It would seem that around this time, Rita began, as most young people do, to want to go out into the world, to leave home, to explore, to meet new people, to begin to build her own life. On April 28, 1967, Rita joined the United Kingdom's Women's Royal Air Force.
It's not a bad thing in life to be proud of your job. If you join the Royal Air Force, you are supporting our airmen not only in the defence of our own country, but in keeping the peace in many parts of the world. For every man who flies the planes, 30 or 40 are needed on the ground, men and women. The Women's Royal Air Force is an essential part of the RAF, and you'll find women in almost every branch of the service, living and working alongside men as colleagues.
The Women's Royal Air Force, or WRAF, was formed at the same time as the Royal Air Force in 1918 at the end of World War I. The WRAF offered young women the opportunity to learn a variety of different trades, to gain their independence, to meet new people, and potentially to travel the world. Rita chose to train to become a cook, and she would undertake her basic training at RAF Spitalgate in Grantham, Lincolnshire, around 85 miles from home. Trainees were required to live and work on camp and would need to pass basic, or, in military vernacular, to pass out, before they would be admitted into the service and complete their full training. For someone as shy as Rita, this was as far from her comfort zone as it was possible to be. Rita's sister Tina would later say, quote, going into the RAF was great for Rita because it broadened her horizons and gave her the confidence which she didn't have. Despite the challenges, Rita graduated from basic training. This footage shows Rita at RAF Spitalgate on the day of her passing out parade. Shortly after this, Rita would be drafted to serve at another base in the UK, RAF Halton. RAF Halton was one of the largest RAF camps in the UK, with over 2,000 people living and working there in 1967. It was located in the village of Halton, near the town of Wendover, Aylesbury, in the south of England. For Rita, the base was 45 miles closer to home than RAF Spitalgate. She moved into Camp Halton on June 21, 1967, and would take up a role in the catering department of St Mary's Royal Air Force Hospital, located on the grounds. Rita would spend less than 5 months at RAF Halton. At 10:30 a.m. on Sunday, November 12, 1967, a dog walker would find Rita's lifeless body in a remote wooded area on the far western border of RAF Halton. The area was known as Rowborough Copse and was located near a disused railway line on the ground of an old coal yard, around 250 yards from a main road. Rita was found to be laying on her back, partially clothed, and it appeared that some attempt had been made at concealing her body using foliage. All of Rita's possessions, which had been scattered throughout the scene, were recovered. A post-mortem examination would reveal Rita's cause of death to be asphyxia by ligature strangulation. She had been strangled to death with her own underwear. Bruising to her knees and toes indicated to the pathologist that Rita had been strangled from behind. She had also been sexually assaulted before her death. The only other mark to Rita's body was a bruise on her left arm. The pathologist noted that Rita's body bore no sign of scratches or grazes from the surrounding vegetation, and death was believed to have occurred at around 9 p.m. the night before. Officers couldn't know it at that time, but the killer had left behind traces of his DNA on an item of Rita's clothing. It would be another 40 years before this sample would yield a full DNA profile of the killer. As Rita was a member of the UK forces and her murder had occurred on a UK military camp, the investigation would be led by New Scotland Yard, supported by local officers from Buckinghamshire Constabulary. The first task for investigators was to establish a timeline of Rita's movements on the evening of Saturday, November 11th. Piecing together witness statements, police were able to ascertain that Rita had worked that day between the hours of 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. That evening, Rita was due to babysit for a senior officer, Wing Commander Roy Watson, and his wife. Rita had never met the Wing Commander before, and it's not clear how the arrangements were made for her to babysit his children that evening. At the end of her shift at St Mary's, Rita made the short walk back to her room at Women's Accommodation Block 7. The plan, as far as Rita was concerned, was to meet Wing Commander Watson at a guards building near an entrance to the camp, not far from her accommodation block, at 7:30 p.m. From there, the Wing Commander was to drive Rita to his home. Rita left Block 7 at 7:15 p.m. in the company of a female acquaintance, a young woman named Liz. Waiting outside Block 7 was Liz's date, a young RAF apprentice named Stephen. Liz and Stephen walked the short distance with Rita to the guards building. Rita tells the couple at this point that they may as well go on and leave her, as her lift was due to arrive shortly. Liz and Stephen left Rita at the guards building at around 7:25 p.m. Meanwhile, at 7:31 p.m, Wing Commander Watson, running late, left home in his car. Watson believed he was due to meet Rita outside her accommodation block. Of course, when Watson arrived, Rita wasn't there. What caused the confusion over the agreed meeting spot is unknown. After waiting for 15 minutes, the Wing Commander headed home. As males at RAF Halton were strictly forbidden from entering female accommodation, the Wing Commander would instead return to the blocks with his wife. Mrs. Watson was to search the block for Rita. The Watsons would later discover that they had been searching for Rita in the wrong place. They had searched accommodation block 6, whereas Rita, of course, lived in block 7. After finding no sign of Rita, the infuriated Wing Commander headed home with the intention of writing a report on Rita's unreliable conduct. In the end, Rita and the Wing Commander would never meet. At around the time the Watsons were searching block 6, 8 p.m, Rita was sighted by a friend, a young woman named Sylvie, at her residence in block 7. Rita and Sylvie had a brief conversation, Rita telling her friend that she would be babysitting that evening. The pair parted, and Rita was next seen walking by a gymnasium on camp grounds at around 8:10 p.m. Rita is then sighted just minutes later by an unnamed witness approaching a car, a red Ford Cortina. It's believed, though it's never been proven, that Rita entered the vehicle. The witness did not see the driver, and this is the last time that Rita would be seen alive. There were two major social events taking place on camp that night: bingo and a disco. In 1967, with the exception of some of the buildings, RAF Halton was open to the public, and civilian members of the surrounding villages and towns were welcome to attend social events and venues on camp. This means that there were dozens or perhaps hundreds of unaccounted for people on Halton that evening. There was no CCTV and obviously no phone records. All that police could do was question those working and living on RAF Halton and in the surrounding towns and villages. Thousands of people were spoken to and several unspecified arrests were made early in the investigation, though nothing substantial enough was found to bring about charges against those arrested. Liz and Stephen, the young couple who walked Rita to the guards building, were questioned and ruled out. An early theory that emerged, and actually remains the working police theory to this day, is that Rita entered the red Ford Cortina that she was witnessed approaching, believing that the driver was the wing commander. Young women were known to thumb lifts in the area after drunken nights out. Many men would drive the street in the hope of picking up a woman and persuading them into a consensual sexual encounter. There are, of course, always those who stalk the streets looking for such encounters with no regard for consent and looking only for the most vulnerable person they can exploit. It's believed to be possible that the driver of the red Cortina was one such man, an opportunistic predator out that night looking to pick up a young woman attempting to thumb a lift. Proponents of this theory believe that Rita, in her belief that the driver was Wing Commander Watson, may have opened with, "Are you here to pick me up for babysitting?" To which the man, seeing this unexpected opportunity, likely responded, "Yes." At which point Rita would have voluntarily entered the vehicle and been driven away by her eventual killer. Of course, as no one saw Rita entering the vehicle, and as there is no other evidence of her whereabouts between 8:10 p.m. and her death at 9 p.m, there's no actual way of knowing where she went or who she encountered. It also can't be known if Rita knew her killer or not. Police do, however, believe that the killer is likely local or at least familiar with the area due to the remoteness of the murder scene. In the days and weeks following Rita's death, several women came forward to report strange and uncomfortable encounters with men in the local area. The men that could be named or identified were spoken to, though none could be conclusively linked to Rita. Several suspects would emerge and be ruled out over the years. First, and the one I'm sure is at the forefront of your mind, is Wing Commander Watson. He was of course questioned and had a solid alibi. And though specific details about the make and model of his vehicle are unavailable, it is known that his car was not red like the Ford Cortina. The DNA profile mentioned earlier, produced from a 2007 cold case review, would later be used to conclusively rule out the Wing Commander. The second suspect to emerge was 49-year-old Joseph Halton Fletcher. Fletcher lived in a caravan on a scrapyard near to the murder scene. Months after the crime, Fletcher was investigated for the sexual assault of a 17-year-old girl. No charges were brought against Fletcher, and, like the Wing Commander, he would be conclusively cleared after 2007. Another suspect ruled out through the DNA breakthrough was an unnamed RAF apprentice working on Halton. The young man was an amateur boxer and known to be a violent loner. He's alleged to have once broken another man's skull by repeatedly smashing his head into a brick wall. The Wing Commander, Fletcher and the apprentice were 3 of almost 200 men ruled out by the discovery of the unspecified DNA sample. A fourth suspect, who was introduced into the investigation years later, mainly through hearsay and gossip, was a corporal serving on RAF Halton. It would be claimed by serving personnel that the corporal was an oddball, and that on the evening of the murder he was sighted with blood on his hands and clothes. The issue with this being that there is no mention of blood in Rita Ellis's autopsy report, and no mention of any cuts either. Police confirmed to a Channel 4 documentary that they were aware of the corporal, but would not comment on whether he was considered a person of interest, or if he'd been ruled out using DNA. There were 3 further attacks on young women within months of Rita's murder, and within miles of RAF Halton, which sparked police fears that they were dealing with a serial attacker. The first attack occurred just weeks later when a young woman was attacked on her way home on November 25th. The second attack was against a woman identified only as Janet X. Janet X was a student nurse visiting a friend in the village of Little Tring, just 4 miles from Halton. She was walking down a country road when she noticed a man following behind her. The man stopped her and asked if she had the time, at which point Janet X ran, though too late, as the man struck her over the head with an object, rendering her semi-conscious. Janet X was then dragged into a nearby field, sexually assaulted, and left for dead. She did, however, survive her attack and was able to provide a description of her assailant. The attacker, who had come to be known as Trilby Man, was white, aged 30 to 35. He stood at 5 feet 10 inches tall and was of slim to medium build. He's described as having a gaunt face with puffy, slit eyes. The man wore a grey or green Trilby hat. From this description, a police sketch was produced, though Trilby Man was never identified. The final attack took place in 1968, but the victim, who was aged 15 at the time, only came forward to report the crime in the early 1980s. The victim, named only as Linda, was also attacked in Little Tring. Linda had spent the evening at a disco. She stepped outside for a walk and to post a letter at a nearby postbox when a car pulled up alongside her. The male driver told Linda that he was carrying medical supplies that urgently needed delivering to a nearby hospital. The driver asked the young girl if she would get in and show him the way, which she did. The man drove Linda down a remote country road, locked the doors, and grabbed her by the throat. When Linda resisted, the man said, quote, "You're not going to give me trouble as well, are you?" Linda would later report that she immediately knew that she wasn't the man's first victim, and that at that time she thought to herself, "This is the man who killed Rita." Linda was subsequently sexually assaulted before the man, bizarrely, drove her home. The man is described as being white, in his early 20s, well-spoken, with fair hair and a distinctive chin. He was never identified, and Rita Ellis's case would turn cold. Buckinghamshire Constabulary would be replaced by Thames Valley Police, who would carry out periodic cold case reviews, including the review that led to the 2007 DNA breakthrough. Rita's case would feature on the BBC's Crime Watch Roadshow and would be the subject of a Channel 4 documentary featuring criminologist Professor David Wilson titled In the Footsteps of Killers, The Murder of Rita Ellis. It was revealed in the documentary that many of the case files that would normally be archived and accessible are sealed until the year 2070. This is likely due to the military connection in the case. Professor Wilson concluded, in his professional opinion, that Rita either knew her attacker or that the sexual encounter started out as a consensual one. He based this conclusion on the fact that Rita's underwear appeared to have been removed prior to the assault, that there was very little sign of resistance, and that the strangulation took place from behind. Professor Wilson would also claim he had identified 2 unnamed men allegedly known to be on RAF Halton at the time, who should have been DNA tested, but weren't. These are, of course, simply Professor Wilson's opinions. Some of you may have watched my video on the case of Bible John, the still unidentified Glasgow serial killer who brutally murdered 3 women in the 1960s. The BBC produced an updated documentary on the case, and the infamous sketch of the man believed to be Bible John was updated to include a smile that would display the man's crooked, overlapping front teeth. A woman who saw the sketch, Pauline Badger, came forward claiming that she may know the man. Pauline had worked as a stewardess at RAF Halton and claimed that the man in the drawing reminded her of a young Scottish man who worked at the camp at the same time. The woman said, quote, "I'm sure I've seen that face on my campus. I have a vivid mental map of him walking and talking with the funny front teeth." One Scot at RAF Halton was a medical lab technician who talked as though he had a cigarette in his mouth, even when he didn't. The interesting thing about this is that the man believed to be Bible John had told one of his victim's siblings that he was a lab technician. Bible John also sexually assaulted his victims before strangling them with their own stockings. It's unknown how seriously police took this lead or if it was explored in any way. There were no other murders on RAF Halton, which is due to close in 2025. Police believe that Rita's killer was likely in his teens to mid-20s, meaning that, if alive today, he would be between 70 and 80 years old. Rita's parents passed away without seeing justice for their daughter. Her mother died 27 years to the day of her daughter's murder in 1994. Rita's sister Tina still has the letters that the pair exchanged while she was away. Tina still works to keep her sister's story alive and hopes to one day see justice done.
If anybody has got any information, or they feel there could be some information that could be significant, then please come forward. Let's have a chapter. Let's have closure for Rita. Rita didn't deserve to die at 19. And I think, just please come forward and support what myself and my husband is doing. When we can, we do go up to Luton Crematorium where a stone is. And the words on the stone are, "Gone from us but not forgotten. Your love and kindness will remain forever in our hearts."